All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tiffany Taylor, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the ASU+GSV Summit. I am thrilled to be with you today for what I know will be a really important conversation for early stage founders working in education. GSV Startup Academy, presented by Cooley, is a space for early stage edtech founders, investors, and educators who are building through complexity. In each session, we bring in leaders and practitioners to share what they're learning in real time, from navigating AI in education to adapting to funding shifts to scaling thoughtfully and reaching new markets. The goal is simple: practical, usable insights you can take back to your work, grounded in Cooley's legal expertise and the broader GSV community of educational experts across the pre-K to grade learning landscape. Now, before we jump in, let's ground ourselves in a few realities. EdTech venture capital hit its lowest level in a decade in 2024. Just $2.4 billion globally, down 89% from the $21 billion peak in 2021. Meanwhile, AI usage among K-12 teachers has more than doubled, from 24% in 2023 to over 60% in the 24-25 school year. And finally, the global AI and education market is projected to grow from $3.6 billion in 23 to nearly $74 billion by 2033. So the opportunity is enormous and the demand is real, but the traditional venture capital isn't just flowing the way it used to. And at the same time, a whole new generation of edtech and education entrepreneurs, many coming out of the classroom, are working to build products that have real impact on learners at scale, not just build up their active user base and increase their ARR. So that raises the question that many founders are holding right now. How do you move from a promising idea or product to durable, real-world impact at scale? And what do you do if you have a product that is focused on social and educational impact, but doesn't meet the specific market needs of traditional venture?
And of course, that's exactly what we're here today to explore with someone who has been thinking about this challenge from every angle. He was at the White House, he's been at Silicon Valley, and now he's in the philanthropic sector. I'm Alex Sarlin, the Global EdTech Lead for ASU+GSV, and I'm honored today to help moderate this session with Kumar Garg, the president of Renaissance Philanthropy. Kumar previously shaped science and technology policy for the Obama administration for nearly 8 years, leading initiatives like the Educate to Innovate campaign, which generated more than $1 billion in philanthropic and in-kind investment. He's had major initiatives to train over 100,000 STEM teachers and bring computer science to all K-12 students. And today, Kumar leads Renaissance Philanthropy's work at the intersection of AI and education, with support from partners like the Walton Family Foundation on their education work to discover and support breakthrough ideas that can drive student success. Kumar, thank you for being here. And for everyone else, we have a Q&A session at the end of our webinar today. So please feel free to think of questions and drop them into your Q&A doc as they come up for you. Put them in the Q&A box. Kumar, thank you so much for being here with us at ASU+GSV Startup Academy.
Thanks for having me, and huge kudos to ASU+GSV and to Cooley for putting this on. I think it's incredibly important and useful.
I love it. I love it. So Kumar, let's start with a term that gets used a lot, but isn't always well understood. And that word is alignment. In education, we often see this fundamental tension, right? Venture investors often optimize for growth and returns. Founders are building with purpose and want to build something meaningful. Philanthropies are looking for social impact, evidence, and long-term outcomes. And the people closest to the work, so our teachers, our students, and our families, they need solutions that can hold up in real classrooms, not just impressive demos. So when you think about alignment in practice, what does it actually look like when it's working? And what role does catalytic capital play in ensuring that educational impact and financial returns are both top of mind for entrepreneurs?
You know, it's a great question. I think one of the things that I think people struggle with is, what are we actually trying to do? Mm-hmm. So here's what I mean, which is ultimately a lot of what founders are in the business of is, hey, I think I can have a really incredible solution for this really important problem. To meet the potential of that solution, I need people to buy that solution. I need capital to build that solution. I need all these different ways to scale. And often I think people fall into organizational structures and funding strategies just based on like mimetic sort of things. Like, what are people around me doing, right? So you'll have people who are, in the healthcare sector, and they'll say, well, in our sector, we have all these nonprofits, lots of hospitals are nonprofits. You can build a highly scalable, vertically integrated organization that calls itself a nonprofit, and it's a very different structure for growth. You can have the same person in a different sector say, well, what we build is startups.
Yeah.
And those startups go through startup accelerators, and then they go out and they make the case for venture style returns. But a lot of that sometimes is not based on someone actually said, here's how you build a hyper scalable technology in this sector. It's just what were their peers doing? What did they think was the right path? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I try to say to founders is that the more ambitious your idea, the more I actually think that you should be smart about money in all its forms. Because that's like the true path to kind of freedom to build. Because what ends up happening is I will be sitting at a table with some Silicon Valley founder, and they'll be like, here's what we're trying to build, and here's who's on our cap table. And I'll say, oh, well, actually, this is a really interesting idea. You're like investing in this early emerging energy technology, could, help the US onshore some of that technology, or could actually have these really interesting climate impacts. Oh, which climate donors are you approaching for philanthropic grants? And they'll be like, I don't really understand that world. And I was like, well, let me just instead of calling them a grant, do you know that there are organizations out there that will write you a check where they will ask for none of your company?
Right.
It's called a non-dilutive cash gift.
Right.
And they're like, wait a minute, why would somebody give me money and not ask for a piece of the company? And I said, well, there's organizations that are looking for high-performing organizations that are putting new points on the board against their aligned mission. Now, it comes with different strings attached. Maybe you have to, release the data that you're collecting. Maybe you're making the R&D public. There's lots of things. But I was like, you spend a lot of time learning how to pitch in one context. These other vectors you treat as like black magic. Like, how would one possibly do that?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things is, whether it's grants from the government, whether it's grants from individual donors or foundations, whether it's risk capital from angels, whether it's, raising real money from VCs, you should treat that, or just getting ARR from your customers, you should treat that all as money. It comes with different attachments as to how long, how durable it is, what it allows you to do. But actually understanding those different things can actually make you a multi-sector athlete, and can allow you to then actually build a business model that is aligned to the thing you want to do, which is I want to do R&D, I want to test my product, I want to build out. And so then I think the alignment, I actually think, is flipped on its head. It's not that all these investors and others need to align. It's that it's actually the doer. The doer is the alignment. The person who's actually driving the strategy of what they want to build. That's where everything's aligned in, because all the capital comes with strings attached. A government that's funding you through a grant has different goals than a funder and everything else. It's aligned because they're all aligned to the thing you want to do next. And so I think a lot of this effort to align the donors kind of misses that different players arrived with different colors of money, with different goals. It's the problem breaks down because people don't know all these different modes of money. And so sometimes they take it without knowing what they're signing up for.
Yeah.
And some of it is they over-index their business strategy to what the capital that they raised. Oh, I get money from the government, therefore I should do this. Oh, I raised it from this investor. It's actually much cleaner if you actually say, well, here's what I'm trying to build. Are you along for that journey?
Yeah.
And finding out the forms of capital that help you along that way. And there's lots of ways, whether, and so I just think that because that is a more non-traditional path than just saying startup, venture returns, raise your next round, people find that it's unfamiliar. But this is what a lot of deep tech investing looks like. If you do stuff in bio, you have to do these different paths around R&D to licensing to others. And so I think in the education space, we just have to be comfortable with this fact that, ultimately what people want is scalable solutions.
Correct.
That's what everybody's in the business of. It's not like the donors who are giving money are like, oh, I'm giving money for things that are not going to scale.
Right.
So alignment on that is not the hard part. It's just that we don't do a great enough job. I think ASU+GSV is a good, is trying to bridge this gap of actually giving founders a lot of these orientations early.
Yeah.
For how do you build a capital strategy that, can actually help you grow? Yeah. Because, education is hard also because of the school districts as customers. These are complicated and all that stuff. So that's the way where I would sort of push the alignment question.
I love that point about, being open to all forms of money and modes of capital, but knowing what strings are attached. And, one of the biggest misconceptions we hear from founders, especially those in that mimetic form, just following the same path they're used to from the VC route, is that when they think of philanthropy, they either think, as you say, non-dilutive capital, no strings attached, great, it sounds great to me, or, well, philanthropies are black magic, slow, bureaucratic. I don't know how to handle that world. And the reality is that it can be incredibly strategic, as you're saying, if you handle it and think about it the right way. And philanthropic giving to education is enormous. It exceeded over $85 billion in the last couple of years. But many early stage EdTech founders, as you're saying, just don't even think about it seriously as part of their funding mix. So let's get detailed here. At what stage might EdTech founders think about philanthropic funding and grants in relationship to traditional VC funding? How might they think of philanthropies as strategic partners, helping them scale and keep their mission and social impact, dreams alive?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll give a couple of categories. I don't think these will be, comprehensive, but just as a couple of ways to think about it. I think one is R&D. So there are things that might be in your development path that you might just feel expensive if you took to your, to your investors and said, what I want to do is, we are building a language instruction app. But I actually think, given the traction we're getting, this would be a really good tool to help adults who struggle with English get access to rapid English acquisition using this AI tool. The economics of that are a little bit more complicated. Are we selling into adult ESL or what are we selling into? It's a little bit more complicated, but could be really valuable to test whether our invention would work with adults with basic literacy. There are donors who focus exactly on that target group. And you could say to them, look, we actually have traction. We're getting really good language acquisition outcomes for adults and, learning English, in other contexts, but we haven't tried this population, probably not in our growth path because, with the economics, but would you fund that research for us to do a pilot with this population where we then test to see whether we get the results? That's the kind of thing that then they are like, hey, maybe, hey, we're bringing this new performer who doesn't work on this population we care about into the mix.
Yeah.
They can even potentially then start to connect you with potential customers.
Right.
Oh, we'll connect you to a bunch of these adult training facilities that could be buyers of your product if the study works out. And then, actually, this becomes so if you take Duolingo, for example, at this point, a major profit driver for Duolingo is the Duolingo English test.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That is not a consumer-facing product nearly the way the Duolingo app is. They had to go up against the TOEFL exam. They had to sell a bunch of universities on accepting that exam. But once they did all that work, it's a huge competitive advantage. They own that market, right? So if Duolingo had actually gone to a philanthropy and said, we want to test whether people who are currently, they can't, they're not applying to these collegiate options because they don't have the language instruction we want to provide, that's probably fundable. So I think R&D that goes towards a disadvantaged population, someone who's poor or someone who's disconnected, to expand that offering to see whether it would have an impact, like potentially very doable. Potentially taking data from those studies and then releasing them as public goods. Like, here's how the research did. Here's how the data could be used by others. Giving input and developing like a broader policy agenda. Here's all the, let's say you're in the delivery business of delivering public benefits to folks who are on SNAP or WIC. And you notice through your delivery that there's like 12 things that are like crazy about the system that you have to navigate. And you're like, we want to do research and actually write up all of the weird places in the system people get disenrolled just based on the way we run it. We make them second form. And we want to partner with a policy team at one of the policy organizations and write that. That is fundable. Again, and now that policy organization may go off and actually make the case for changing those things. That could actually help you actually operate in the real world. So that the way to think about philanthropic is these are things where they create substantial public benefit. They can create private benefit. They can help you. It's not like that's not allowed, but they create a lot of outsized public benefit for disadvantaged population, for policy goals or others. And the nice thing is like the funders can coach you through this, your peers can coach you through it, but that's what the value add is. And so a lot of times what I think people get stuck is that, it's like their marketing team or their fundraising team basically will say, okay, let's pitch them. And they'll say, what the R&D we want to do is we want to do a really lightweight study that shows our product works and put it on our website.
Yeah.
What's a donor going to say to that? Like, sure, we will pay for your marketing,
Sure.
Like that's not the logic model that's going to, they want you to actually be like genuinely interested on, I think I have something important. I could serve this population.
Right.
I probably need the pilot money to try it.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Along these lines, Kumar, like a question I know we constantly hear from founders who are worried just about signaling. What's your thoughts on how venture investors typically react when they see philanthropic capital on a cap table, or when a founder is pursuing grants alongside a raise? Does it help or does it hurt?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that the thing that is not true is that in most instances, having philanthropy on your cap table or those kind of things give some sort of assurance to later stage investors that this is a bankable company. Because ultimately what they want is what's your ARR, what's your growth, how fast are you growing, all these sort of metrics that later stage investors are going to look at, they're still going to look at, right? Sometimes in regulated industries, if you have certain types of investors that suggest sophistication, I'm a financial startup and you've got folks who really know that industry, or you're a defense startup and you've got folks who are deep in that world. So I think it helps a little bit to say there are philanthropic donors that really understand this market and they like us. Yeah. But I think it doesn't solve business risk or technical risk in some big way. I think the better way is if founders can show that they are scrappy and that they are able to extend the dollar. They're you're putting money into us, but we're going out there and we're getting smart about how to get money from the state, money from a foundation and others, but we're using it to actually give us more exit tickets. We've now found a new customer segment that would otherwise not be in our build path. Yeah. I think the problem is people sort of think of it as a handoff. I'll have these philanthropies, they'll give me credibility, and it's there's no handoff. You're building out your strategy. If you can show that differentiated capital suggests that you're hungry, versatile, resilient, capable of fast learning and going after opportunities. Yeah. In the education sector, that's a huge positive because these school districts are not made the same. You're not going to be able to, that suggests, I could make this case to an investor, that's the kind of founder that's going to be able to keep punching and scaling through it. Yeah. Versus I haven't talked to any investors. I've only raised from philanthropy and some impact investors. And now I'm going to go for the first time. And they're like, why is this handoff not happening? It's like, well, like everyone, like you different type of investors are going to have different business metrics, and you can look those up and then be ready to talk about it.
I think your point about the founder themselves, the doer, or the founder being the alignment, having to look at the different types of capital and figure out which are going to be useful in different ways, and what is the sort of give and take for the different types of investors or philanthropic donors is a really, really powerful one. And I think Renaissance Philanthropy has been really innovative in doing new things to sort of create mechanisms for people to move forward in that space. So I want to make this really concrete for the founders listening. Let's talk about some of the initiatives you've done in this context. And I wanted to start with the tools competition. All right. Now the world's largest EdTech competition, I believe, as of this moment. It's awarded over $17 million to over 150 tools across 44 countries. The last cycle, you had almost 2,000 submissions from all over the world, and the winning tools are projected to reach over 131 million learners, and that is obviously true scale. So tell us about the tools competition. How does this competition model work, and how do you use it for the types of entrepreneurs in the audience today to help them become that alignment and and grow in context of social impact?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we started the model actually during COVID. So our first round actually happened. It was right when you had those crazy stats of like 1 billion kids out of school suddenly going into some version of no learning or online learning. And one of the things my reflection at the time was, as someone who had worked in EdTech, was like, we were certainly not ready as a community, and both on the science of learning, but also on just like deployment, everything else. So one of the kind of orientations when we started the tools competition was like almost like a back to basics. Like the community has too often chased like a single silver bullet kind of frame. And we're like, look, like the moment came, there was ever a moment. So like, oh my God, like everyone's learning online. If it was just a question of adoption, you got your moment of adoption, and like the stickiness did not happen, right? People were like, oh, let's go back to like less than this, right? So that is not always true. Sometimes like you get this huge adoption curve, and it's way better. And like you come back, like we're seeing this with workplace, working at work physically, it's come back, but like there are huge advantages to these flexible models that are still playing out 5 to 6 years later.
Yeah.
So one of the ideas behind tools competition was we want to incentivize founders and teams to think about learning science and research partnerships from day one. Because one of the things that would always hear is like, you start to grow, and then people are like, you need stuff on your website that shows your stuff works. And it creates a really bad dynamic with researchers, because they're like, I'm not here to launder you like nice quotes for your website. But there's actually really deep research partnerships you can have that are very productive. So one of the things we said was, okay, just to be eligible for the competition, you need to have a research partner. That's had this huge positive impact where over the years as we've done it, people then go out and recruit a research partner. Even if they don't win, they're like, that research partner has all these great ideas for experiments we should be running and all that stuff. So that has been a useful part. The second thing we said was, we don't care about organizational type. You could be an individual, you could be a student, you could be a teacher, you could be a nonprofit, you could be a for-profit. It's just a cash award. Because part of the thing is like people get very touchy about organizational type. We only fund nonprofits. We only fund startups. We were like, people don't know what they're building at start. So let's just give them the flexibility. They can then figure out the organizational type that will allow them to build at scale. Maybe they start as a nonprofit and they convert to a for-profit because they want to raise a lot more capital, or they start as an individual just with an idea and an open source project and they want to convert. So that was the other thing, which was don't treat organizational form so seriously when things are starting. Just be open and let people kind of build scalable models. And then I would say the third thing that like has been really useful or rare, I mean, ASU+GSV I think is also filling part of this hole. It's just like I've been really surprised that there are not good formats for EdTech talent globally. Like we're actually, one thing that is a remnant of the post-COVID thing is that like learning tech has become much more global. Like teams are operating, doing interesting stuff in a lot more geographies, but they don't actually intersect with each other very much. Like most donors I interact with can name check like the 4 American teams. And I'm like, well, have you met this Romanian team? And have you like, there's this interesting project out of Brazil, and these 4 Indian teams are doing really interesting work. And so one of the reasons I think we've had staying power is partly just because it was a global crisis. We launched it globally, but now it's created like, it's the finding spot for finding emerging tech teams where some of the founding team is non-American, and that I think is also like a useful sort of thread. So, but I think, we want, investors and others to like grab teams that are coming through the tools competition. And we've had folks M&As off that, just like acquisitions out of it. We've had teams get, partnerships out of it. We've had teams go out to raise substantial money off it. So we want to be like an early validator, an early boost, and get things going and have this sort of global community. And so we've had teams that didn't win one year, but kept going based on the feedback we gave them. So that's kind of the basic idea. Like we sort of think of it at top of the funnel. And then the AI thing has just taken it to the next level where we get to see all these now very AI native early, things come together where you're like, it's a 3-person team and like building really fast using these tools. So that's also interesting to sort of see, like you can see what is the future of the EdTech startup could start to look like with these new tools.
I love that. And I'd love to just stay here for a moment just to talk about another one of your initiatives, the Learning Engineering Virtual Institute, because, as a former classroom teacher and school leader, what stands out to me is that this isn't just about funding tools, right? It's about setting audacious goals like doubling the rate of middle school math learning, right? And it's bringing together those technical experts and learning scientists in multi-year partnerships with deep collaboration across institutions and disciplines. And you're actually testing and iterating and working to scale what works. Can you just briefly tell us a little bit about how this initiative came about and like what makes this model different from those traditional grants or even the competition that you just mentioned that's really focused on tools?
Yeah, so tools competition, I would sort of think of it as like top of the funnel. It's really to find emerging teams and emerging ideas. I would say like our Levy program, our Learning Engineering Virtual Institute, is more on the moonshot side, right? So it's more like, okay, if we're doing lots of work on the top of the funnel, are there particular targets we think are ambitious targets to set as a community to then say, okay, we're going to take a handful of teams, carefully select them into a multi-year program where the goal is, can you do like a big if true target? Like, whoa. If you could solve that, that kind of changes people's expectations of what's possible. And so for our first Levy program, it sounds like so obvious, but it's like, it still is like in education kind of we basically said, look, in 2012, JPAL published a study that showed, and they were able to replicate it, that you can use high dosage tutoring to double the rate of middle school math learning.
Yep.
There were just 2 caveats with that study and the replication. One was it was $4,000 per kid. So it's hard to scale at that price point. Right. And the second was they were like, look, like, we don't really know. We were able to replicate it, but like, can we actually, what does this look like kind of in the wild across multiple performers, kind of at scale? So we said, okay, let's take that basic idea, keep the goal, double the rate of middle school math learning compared to what students would be otherwise. But can you do it at under $1,000 per kid, if not under $500 per kid?
Right.
So that was the goal of the program. Like, do you have a technical solution that can deliver high dosage tutoring under this price point where you can actually meet the learning goal, the doubling the rate?
Yeah.
So it's applied, we've got, and the idea was that they would have to test and show progress and annual progress against that 5-year goal. And so we've got 7 teams in the program. They're all attacking that same challenge. We're in year 4, and like we've got multiple teams that are on track to the goal. So like next year will be a big year when all the teams go into the final year will be a big RCT where they've like pencils down. Can you show these results, replicate? at that price point, and then we'll release them to the field and say, like, look, either we have or have not shown that you can do high dosage tutoring at cost. But the idea was like, actually, and so a lot of the teams, the actual technical innovation is under the hood, right? Some of them are using these like dynamic dosage models between human tutors and AI tutors. Some of them are actually doing a train the trainer model, where the AI is actually the coach of the tutors. Some of them are actually using like students teaching simulated students as like the coaching, as a pedagogical model. Some of them are, doing like, the equivalent of just this is a teacher aid. Teachers can kind of assign to the students this as like an additional curriculum support. So lots of different models, all with this like, okay, can you hit both the doubling goal and the price point? And when we started the program, we were like, it could be that nobody hits the goal, right? But it seemed like at least plausible. We've seen it in the wild. We just haven't seen it at that price point to go after. So we're designing now a new levy program that we'll be focusing on early literacy.
Yeah.
And, we're in the stages of developing that. And it's like, okay, what is the next thing where you have the similar thing where it's a big if true goal? Can you show tools that can actually deliver that result? Can you actually show that, technology, especially AI, is going to be a huge part of that? And then can you find teams that are like, yes, actually now it's going to take multiple years of iterative development. We think we could actually hit that. We could actually, use ASR to better diagnose kids with, reading difficulties on target and get them back on track. So that's the basic theory of the way we design levy programs, which is they're more kind of like real world, big if true targets. And tools competition is more like, people are working on lots of things, but they've got a technical edge to them. And the funny thing is these two play off each other. Like one of our levy math teams came out of the tools competition. We like found them through the tools competition, and then they ended up applying into levy. And like, we would have not, they work in West Africa. Like there's no way we would have discovered them without the tools competition.
Okay. And we wanted to talk about one more initiative that comes out of Renaissance. It's really amazing what you've done already, but you've talked about math and literacy and early stage startups around the world with tools. We wanted to talk to give you opportunity to highlight some of the work that you've been doing that speaks very directly to the PreK to Gray mission of the Startup Academy and the sort of transitions. You recently partnered with the Schultz Family Foundation on more than $3 million investment in AI-driven career navigation tools. And our understanding is there's an initiative called CareerNet that's basically takes all this big repository of career questions from millions of young people to create benchmarks that train AI platforms. It sounds incredibly interesting. And you've talked about the idea that AI coaching tools, when they're built cleverly with evidence and responsibly, can actually help level the playing field. That's something I think everybody in EdTech is really excited about. For founders here who may be working in the workforce development space or career navigation or career connected learning, tell us about these initiatives and how philanthropy writ large can help with these missions of helping young people with their actual career and to some extent college outcomes, because that's something that aligns so well with.
And we actually work on the sort of like post-sec and workforce through tools competition as well. The idea behind the career network was actually like related, but a little bit different. The thing that, one of the big questions, philanthropy, but like in general, we face as a society is like, how do we shape this like AI race that we're currently in, right? The companies are competing, they're building these huge capabilities on the deployment side, right? The models are getting better. But the question is like, is there any role that other players can play, unless you're in one of these frontier AI labs, in shaping how those models will develop on the key tasks you care about? Yeah. You might care about how good is it as a tutor? How good is it as a career navigator? And one of our sort of hypotheses is that one really useful way to shape that race is through the use of benchmarks. Because I don't know, like for folks who are nerds, you can like track when the companies put out their press release. Yeah. Here's our newest model. The press release is actually just like a list of how it did on a whole bunch of benchmarks. Yep. Here's how it did on, the programming, the SWE benchmark. Here's how it did on humanities last exam and all that stuff. But a lot of times these companies just pick up what's available. They're like, we fed it the MCAT and here's how I did it on the medical exam, and we fed it to this.
Yeah.
So a lot of times they're not building totally new benchmarks. Sometimes they are, but we're going to wait a long time if we just wait around for somebody to build the public benchmark on the thing we care about. So the idea was to do this as a test, partly to like also showcase to our philanthropic partners, like this is a useful place to spend money, is build benchmarks on real world tasks you care about. Career navigation is clearly like that, where people are already using these tools, these AI bots and others, asking them, hey, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. Like, let's build an actual repository of actual career navigation questions. Yeah. Let's rate them for what career navigators say is the right answer. And then let's feed the models into them and say, did it get 16%? Did it get 46%? Did it get 80%? Did it get 0%? And then, you know, that gives an incentive to companies where this thing that is like increasingly an important use case, if the companies are scoring really low, that their most recent, most amazing model actually gets all these career navigation questions wrong, and you can rate them on a bunch of things, accuracy, context, you know, a bunch of things that career navigators would do. So that's the basic theory, which is, you know, hopefully these benchmarks then make the underlying algorithms easier for then the founders to build on top of. But I also think like this is a place where founders can also say, like, we need these high quality benchmarks so that when we are trying to eke out value out of these models, we don't have to do endless customization, right? Because the models kind of have to be wrestled to be made useful. So that those are like another place where I think philanthropic dollar can be very useful. You know, there was that's our sort of theory of the case.
Yeah, that's helpful. So Kumar, we've covered a lot of ground. So we talked about catalytic capital to competitions to multi-year research partnerships. But I want to bring it back to the individual founders who's watching this, right? Maybe working nights and weekends on a problem that they just care deeply about and just wondering if any of this applies to them. If you could give one piece of advice for EdTech entrepreneurs who are working overtime to solve education's most persistent challenges, what would it be? What would that one piece of advice be?
I think I think that it's very useful for a founder to write like a hopes and dreams document.
Yes.
That basically outlines like what is it that they are actually motivates them, that they're trying to accomplish into the world. What are the ideas underlying it that give them the most energy? What are the, you know, the wish fors? Like, I wish I could go after this target and all that stuff.
Yeah.
In a way that is not what they give to their, you know, when they're raising money and like, this is our path to revenue positive. And it's like a slightly more of like a founder. Here are the ideas I'm thinking through and everything. Because I think that kind of document then given to their investors, given to donors and others, will give people like a way in to be like, I didn't realize you were really interested in working with this type of population, or you were really interested in these underlying research questions. And a lot of times people, they're so used to the formal pitch that they haven't actually opened up their hopes and dreams kind of frame. And a lot of times, like, you know, in whether you're raising from philanthropy and others, people kind of want to know, what are the problems you find fascinating? What are the things you're interested in working on? They can then work through and be like, oh, maybe there's an overlap here. And so I would say, and I'm, you know, I'll volunteer to at least be a reader if people are willing to put their hopes together.
I love it. Well, listen, folks, you should take Kumar up on that offer if you are listening in. But Kumar, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful and grounding. Now we want to shift gears a little bit and bring in Naomi May from Cooley for a few minutes just to share a legal and structural lens, particularly around public-private partnerships and how founders can think about structuring this catalytic capital in ways that support growth while protecting the mission. Naomi, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Cooley, we are a global law firm. Relevant to this conversation, I am a partner in Cooley's dedicated education and education technology practice. We bring our depth and breadth and passion in this space, Along with our core ECVC practice, we do more venture capital financings than any firm in the world. But also, we have a social impact practice, and we have recently rebranded that practice to be our impact investing and mission-driven enterprises practice. We are really passionate, and I mean this truly, about driving impact through innovation, capital, and connection. Before we get back to our main show, I thought I'd leave you with a few quick thoughts when you're thinking about impact investing from our legal perspective. And here's what we tell our clients, and when we walk through with our clients about when we're thinking about impact investing and catalytic capital. It really can be a powerful tool to crowd in more mainstream private capital, but really echoing a lot of the themes that you've already heard today. This is something you really need to think about intentionally from the beginning, rather than approaching it in a haphazard way and not making assumptions. Have your business, your solution, your mission, the end game really drive the capital you raise and not the other way around. And similarly, think about your funding from a more holistic perspective, particularly in regulated spaces, right? In EdTech, you are building your company in a multifaceted world that involves many private and public funding sources, but you can't walk in naive. You have to understand what it means to accept and go after state or federal dollars, just like you have to understand what it means to accept philanthropic versus venture dollars. They all have different implications for your business and your potential for growth. So I think another way to say this is that the important thing to remember is that the tool really has to be fit for purpose. So the catalytic capital or impact investment, regardless of the form it takes, maybe even, for example, below market loans, should actually make the company more attractive to private venture investors, for example, not less. So if you find yourself maybe negotiating really arcane provisions for maybe a program-related investment that the charitable investor is requiring, always question what new VC investors will think of those terms, right? Philanthropic investors may require redemption rights or maybe a really clear way to exit an investment if the company deviates from the mission, the kind of the reason that they invested in the first place. These kinds of what we call fiduciary outs can be really challenging, and you might read expensive to negotiate, and may ultimately hinder VC fundraising later on down the road. We often see founders come into a deal thinking they can get a philanthropic investor to agree to the same or maybe similar terms that they have with traditional VCs, even impact VCs, either on a safe or a convertible note, and then being surprised when the process takes 3 times longer to negotiate, and then you still end up with different terms because of the nature of philanthropic capital and the legal requirements to protect the charitable nature of the investment. So basic advice is for founders to really recognize that catalytic capital can be fantastic when it's fit for purpose and actually catalyzes new investment, but there's also a risk that the wrong tools can actually delay or hinder private investment. And it is really important, just to give a plug, to work with attorneys who really understand the nature of these type of investments, who are really adept at threading the needle to meet the charitable requirements and set the company up for success, like Cooley. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Naomi. And Cooley really is incredibly knowledgeable about so many aspects of the EdTech world. Thank you so much. Now we'd love to hear from the audience. We have a couple of questions coming up so far. I'm going to start reading them. If you have questions that have come up for you as you're listening to this amazing Q&A session with Kumar or listening to Naomi, please put them in the question box and we will get to them. But let's start with one of the questions that has come up that I think is really cuts to the heart of what you're trying to do with Renaissance, Kumar, which is, what would it take for there to be better models? Why aren't there better models to connect great ideas in education with the resources needed to build them? Why does it sometimes feel like founders have this amazing idea and they're sort of out on an island trying to convince everybody it's amazing when it seems and there aren't ways to just get it started and get that type of catalytic capital going?
It's a great question. I think part of it is just the social sector, I think, ends up having really large fixed OPEX rather than what you would consider kind of operating capital to try out new ideas. So that happens in two levels. One of the things I observed when I was in the government is we say we do R&D across the United States, but actually it's very concentrated in a handful of industries. So we do a lot of defense R&D. About 50% of federal R&D is defense. We then do a bunch of biomedical R&D, that's like NIH. And then we do a little spattering of space, a little smattering of energy, and then everything else is below the fold. So when I joined the government, education R&D was so small, it didn't even get a line. It wasn't like when they do the crosscut, there was no education line, right? It was below the fold to even count. They've eventually, I complained enough, they fixed that, there was an education line, but it's still very small. So one of the things that ends up happening is you just get more shots on goal if you have a larger set of attack vectors on the R&D side. You just try a lot more ideas. So weirdly enough, when I was in the government, we would find more interesting education and training ideas from DARPA. And they were just doing them as one-off ideas. They were like, oh, we've got this interesting idea for better training people so that we could create better warfighters. And those would be pretty good education ideas. But in their world, it was just a throwaway idea. And education was a serious idea because there wasn't that much R&D funding. So I think one of the things we just have to collectively work on is how do we make the case? There's an effort right now in updating the way IES works and should there be a DARPA for education legislation and others? I think there's a big case to be made that we need more top of the funnel R&D funding, whether happening at the federal level or in the state and local level. I think on the other side of it is that, most of the buyers in education are school districts, and so they end up being end stage buyers, it's I need this for next year. And so they're not able to forward fund experiments in the same way. They can do pilots, but it has to be next school year. They're not able to do what are more innovative financing structures to say, hey, I want this capability in 5 years. What do people do in energy? They're I need this energy resource in 5 years. So I'm actually going to subsidize your R&D costs for the next 5 years so this capability turns online when I need it. When's the last time you saw a buyer in the education space be able to do that, right? So it means that then founders have to basically block and tackle through ARR every piece of the R&D to scale up puzzle. You got to get customers, got to raise money, got to use that and forward. And so it just means that these models end up being very I'm solving today's problem with today's money. You need to get contact forms to your students. We can solve that. Versus kind of more. So I think when it comes to donors, I sort of push them on are there new ways we could be doing procurement? Can we use more outcome-based procurement? Could we be doing more on the early side? But I think part of it is founders are stuck in a system they cannot fix because they have to operate within these sort of capital flows. But I think for those of us who are kind of system leaders and at least trying to push the system, it's important to say you get more creativity and more ambitious shots on goal, the different kinds of money are at the table. So one of the ideas at Renaissance is, try to start to both on the philanthropic way that we raise money, but then also in how we talk to the government. So, we have one of our biggest partnerships is with ARIA. It's a new agency created by the British government that is much more DARPA style. They've got $1 billion budget. They're doing interesting stuff. And that is changing the British R&D ecosystem because they're putting very different calls out. So, that started during COVID. A few years later, it's having real impact. So we just can't fall to the failure of nothing can change, but it also is not going to change because, we're just going to say, let's just. So I think we have to put new forms of capital on the field and then kind of use that to drive the system.
Yeah, it's an optimistic answer, and I like hearing it. I think others would do as well. One question coming from something was mentioned earlier. You mentioned that sometimes traditional investors prioritize growth or ARR over learning outcomes or sort of other metrics. What metrics or evidence should founders be collecting early on to make sure that they do make themselves attractive to philanthropic partners who care about student impact and outcomes? And I'm curious the relationship to research partners as well when you answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that at least philanthropic donors care about is that does the founder sort of exhibit that they're actually interested in learning outcomes? I think there's like a little bit of like yeah, sure, we've got studies, but I think there's like there's a genuine level of curiosity as to like, am I actually, is what I'm doing working, and why? So some founders are actually like deeply curious about, we tried this strategy and it's really seemed to be working, and we think it's working because of this reason. Donors, I think, eat that up, because in some ways what they're hoping is like this organization that is scaling is actually figuring something out about the puzzle of how do we actually deliver high quality learning at scale. And like, they want to be in on that story. Like, what are you learning? What are you finding out? What's hard? What's not? And so to treat their own, theory is actually very useful for what they can actually then do next. So that's, I think, one piece of it. I think a second piece would just be that like, it's important for them to then articulate, like we were talking about earlier, what's the thing you actually then need help on? Like, I'm interested in these research questions, but these are hard to get funded. And so bring them in on that kind of this idea that you're, sometimes I think people are like, we have the answer, we just need a little bit more money to grow. And I think donors kind of are like, they're long-term players. They're like, we've been pitched, I have the answer for 10 years. So they're like, it's actually just feels more honest to them. We have a promising idea. Here's what we're learning. Here's what's working. Is not. So just giving like that sense that like, you should not think like, very rarely are they going to be like, sit up straight if you say, I think we've got it. They're like, yeah, everyone thinks they've got it. Like, so just, you're probably some piece of a larger solution.
100%. Quick question for you, Naomi. Kumar mentioned that the tools competition went out of its way to not distinguish between nonprofits and for-profits. Everybody was eligible, but I imagine that many founders who are registered as regular for-profit companies don't know about their status with regarding the ability to take grants. Can you just talk briefly about what that looks like, and what form the philanthropic funding would come in for a for-profit entity?
Absolutely. And I would totally agree, Kumar, in terms of not focusing too much at the very earliest stages. I would say that you do reach a point where it does become important, particularly when you're looking at fundraising, because you can't really, you can't raise VC funding into a nonprofit. However, in the earliest stages, I think it really doesn't matter that much, other than to the extent that you're looking at control, right? And the limitations of running a nonprofit, and the founding structure, and how you're kind of running the company on a day-to-day basis. But when you're experimenting, when you're doing that research, doesn't matter at all. And it really is more a question, it's a practical question of kind of what you need to have set up until you're really ready to get that funding. In the meantime, it actually is easier to get grant funding. The big question, though, becomes what can you do with that grant funding if, in fact, you want to convert from a nonprofit to a for-profit, and that becomes a little bit more tricky. But yes, absolutely, for-profits can obtain grant funding. There's a lot of grant funding out there, and get all the non-dilutive capital you can. Go after it, find all the opportunities opportunities that are out there, because there are a lot.
Fantastic. There are still some great questions coming in, but we're coming on the top of the hour. So Tiffany, what do you think? Do we have time for one more? I think we may need to close it up and ask everybody to take your questions and follow up afterwards. Kumar is available, and you know, I think these are terrific questions about how to structure all the pieces together. Tiffany, what do we think?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's follow up with those questions after, so we can be respectful of everyone's time. But first and foremost, Kumar, thank you so much for truly just sharing your insights today, and bigger picture for the work that you are leading at Renaissance Philanthropy, just to really help education entrepreneurs think bigger about what's possible. And to everyone listening, this conversation is really a reminder that succeeding and scaling in education is not just about product market fit, right? It's about understanding systems, building the right partnerships, and staying committed long enough to create the change that is lasting. So remember that the people, right, building these tools, the engineers, the developers, the designers, they are in the classroom every day, right? But with the right partners, they can build the proximity, the evidence, and the staying power to create solutions that truly serve our learners. So wherever you're building from right now, I'm going to leave you with two questions. Who are you building with, and how are you staying close to the learners that you're building for? Because it's that proximity paired with the right partners that's going to turn that idea into lasting change. So again, Kumar, thank you again. Thank you to Naomi and Cooley for partnering with us on the Startup Academy, and to all of you for spending your time with us today. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you in San Diego in just a few months. Thanks, folks.
Remember to write those hopes and dreams. I love that.